Section 8 of the Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jason Mayoff. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 8. What the Frost Giants Did to Nanny's Run. The Frost Giants. Do you believe in giants? No, do you say? Well, listen to my story, which is a really true one, and then answer my question. Many hundreds of years ago, certain people who lived in the north, and were therefore called Northmen, had a strange idea of the form and situation of the earth. They thought it was a flat, circular piece of land, surrounded by a great ocean, and that this ocean was again surrounded by a wall of snow-covered mountains, where lived the race of frost giants. I have seen a pretty picture of this world of theirs, with a lovely rainbow bridge arching up over the sea to the earth, and a great coiled serpent holding his tail in his mouth, lying in mid-ocean like a ring around the land. Perhaps you will some day read about it all, but at present we have only to do with the frost giants. For I want to tell you that, although no one now thinks of believing about the serpent, or the flat earth, or the rainbow bridge, yet the frost giants still live, and their home is really among the mountains. You may call them by what name you like, and we may all know certainly that they are not what the old Northmen believed them to be, but are God's workmen, a part of nature's family, employed to work in the great garden of the world. But whenever we look at their work, we cannot fail to admit that to do it needed a giant's strength, and so they deserve their title. Have you sometimes seen great boulder stones, as big as a small house, that stand alone by themselves in some field, or on some seashore where no other rocks are near? Well, the frost giants carried these boulders about, and dropped them down miles away from their homes, as you might take a pocketful of pebbles and drop them along the road as you walk. Sometimes they roll great rocks down the mountainsides, playing a desperate game of ball with each other. Sometimes they are sent to make a bridge over Niagara Falls, or to build a dam across a mountain torrent in an hour's time. Now and then they have to rake off a steep mountainside, as you might a garden bed, and sometimes to bury a whole village so quickly that the poor inhabitants do not know what strange hand brought such sudden destruction upon them. Their deeds often seem to be cruel, and we cannot understand their meaning. But we shall sometime know that the loving Father who sent them orders nothing for our hurt, but has always a loving purpose, though it may be hidden. While I thus introduce to you the frost giants, let me also present their tiny brethren and sisters, the frost fairies, who always accompany them on their expeditions. And however terrible is the deed that has to be done, these little people adorn it with the most lovely handiwork, tiny flowers and crystals and veils of delicate lacework, fringes and spangles and star-work and carving, so that nothing is so hard and ugly and bare that they cannot beautify it. Now that you are introduced, you will perhaps like to join a frost party that started out to work one day in the early spring of 1861 from their homes among the Olympic Mountains. Nanny's Run. Can you imagine a beautiful oval-shaped bay, almost encircled by a long arm of sand stretching out from the mainland? In its deep water the largest vessels might ride at anchor, but at the time of my story a lonelier place could scarcely be found. Now and then Indian canoes glided over the water, and at long intervals some vessel from the great island away yonder to the north visited the little settlement upon the shore of the bay. It is indeed a very little settlement, a few houses clustered together upon the sandy beach close to the blue water. Behind the houses rises a cliff crowned with great fir trees, standing tall and dark in thick ranks, making a dense forest. And beyond this forest, cold, snow-covered mountains lift their peaks against the sky, a fitting home for the frost giants. 3 streams, straying from the faraway mountains, and fed by their melted snows and hidden springs, find their way through the forest, leap and tumble over the cliff, and, passing through the little settlement, reach the sea. The people who live here call these little streams runs, and one of them is Nanny's Run. And now, who is Nanny? Why, Nanny is Nanny Dwight, a little girl, not yet 5 years old, who lives in the small square house standing under the cliff. She sits even now on the doorstep, and her red dress looks like one gay flower brightening the sombre shadows of the firs. Her father and mother came here to live when she was but a baby, and before there was a single house built in the place, and it is out of compliment to her that one of the streams has been named Nanny's Run. While Nanny sits on the doorstep and looks out at the sea, watching for the vessel that will bring her father home from Victoria, we will go through the forest and up the mountainsides till we find the home of the frost giants and see what they are about today. They have been working all winter, but not quite so busily as now, for since yesterday they have cracked that big rock in two and dug the great cave under the hill, and now they are gathered in council on the mountainside that overlooks a dashing little stream. As we followed this stream from the seashore, we happen to know that it is no other than Nanny's Run. And as we have already begun to care for the little girl, and therefore her namesake, we are anxious to know what the giants think of doing. We have not long to wait before we shall see, and hear too, for a great creaking and cracking begins, and while we gaze, astonished, the mountainside begins to slide, and presently, with a rush and a roar, dashes into the stream, and chokes it with a huge dam of earth and rocks and trees. What will the stream do now? For a moment the water leaps into the air, all foam and sparkle, as if it would jump over the barrier and find its way to the sea at any rate. But this proves entirely unsuccessful, and at last, after whirling and tumbling, trying to creep under, trying to leap over, it settles itself quietly in its prison, as if to think about the matter. Now, if you will stay and watch it day after day, you will see what good result will come from this waiting, for every hour more and more water is running to its aid, and as its forces increase, we begin to feel sure that although it can neither pass over nor under, it will some day be strong enough to break through the frost giant's dam. And the day comes at last, when, summoning all its waters to the attack, it makes a breach in the great earth wall, and in a strong, grand column, as high as this room, marches away towards the sea. As we have the wings of thought to travel with, let us hurry back to the settlement, and see where Nanny is now, and tell the people, if we only can, what a wall of water is marching down upon them. For you see, the little channel that used to hold Nanny's Run is not a quarter large enough for this torrent that has gathered so long behind the dam. Peep in at the window, and see how Nanny stands at the kitchen table, cutting out little cakes from a bit of dough that her mother has given her. She is all absorbed in her play, and her mother has gone to look into the oven at the nicely browning loaves. Oh, don't we wish the house had been built up on the cliff among the fir trees, safe above the reach of the water. But alas, here it stands just in the path that the torrent will take, and we have no power to tell of the danger that is approaching. Mrs. Dwight turns from the oven, and passing the window on her way to the table, suddenly sees the great wall of water only a few rods from her house. With one step she reaches the bedroom, seizes the blankets from the bed, wraps Nanny in them, and with the little girl on one arm, grasps Frankie's hand, and telling Harry to run beside her, opens the door nearest the cliff and almost flies up its steep side. 5 minutes afterwards, sitting breathless on the roots of an old tree, with her children safe beside her, she sees the whole shore covered with surging water, and the houses swept into the bay, tossing and drifting there like boats in a stormy sea. And this is what the frost giants did to Nanny's Run. The Indians, What will Nanny do now? Here in our New England towns it would seem hard enough to have one's house swept away before one's eyes. But then you could take the next train of cars and go to your aunt in Boston or your uncle in New York to stay until a new house could be prepared for you. But here is Nanny, hundreds and thousands of miles away from any such help, for there are not only no railroads to travel upon, but not even common roads, nor horses, nor wagons. Nevertheless, there are neighbors who will bring help. You remember reading in your history how, when our great-great-grandfathers came to this country to live, they found it occupied by Indians. The Indians are all gone from our part of the country now, but out in the far northwest, where Nanny lives, they still have their wigwams and canoes, still dress in blankets, and wear feathers on their heads, and in that particular part of the country lives a tribe called the Flatheads. They take this odd name because of a fashion they have of binding a board upon the top of a child's head while he is yet very young, in order that he may grow up with a flattened head, which is considered a mark of beauty among these savages, just as small feet are so considered among the Chinese, The Flatheads are Nanny's only neighbors, and perhaps you would consider them rather undesirable friends. But when I tell you how they came at once with blankets and food and all sorts of friendly offers of shelter and help, you will think that some white people might well take a lesson from them. They had been in the habit of bringing venison and salmon to the settlement for sale, and when Nanny's mother tells them that she has no longer any money to buy, they say, "Oh no, it is a potluck," which in their language means a present. Happily, the warm weather is approaching, and a little girl who has lived out of doors so much does not find it unsafe to sleep in the hammock which Hunter has slung for her among the trees, or even on the ground, rolled in an Indian blanket. And when her shoes wear out, she can safely run barefooted in the woods or on the sand. Before many weeks have passed, some of the tall fir trees are cut down, and a new house is built, this time safely perched on top of the cliff. And so far as I know, the frost giants have never succeeded in touching it. End of Section 8. Recording by Jason Mayoff, Montreal. jasonmayoff.com.
Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Carroll. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 9. How Quercus alba Went to Explore the Underworld. Quercus alba lay on the ground, looking up at the sky. He lay in a little brown, rustic cradle which would be pretty for any baby, but was specially becoming to his shining, bronzed complexion. For although his name, Alba, is the Latin word for white, he did not belong to the white race. He was trying to play with his cousins Coccinia and Rubra, but they were 2 or 3 yards away from him, and not one of the 3 dared to roll any distance for fear of rolling out of his cradle. So it wasn't a lively play, as you may easily imagine. Presently, Rubra, who was a sturdy little fellow, hardly afraid of anything, summoned courage to roll full half a yard, and, having come within speaking distance, began to tell how his elder brother had, that very morning, started on the grand underground tour, which to the Quercus family is what going to Europe would be for you and me. Coccinia thought the account very stupid, said his brothers had all been, and he should go too sometime, he supposed, and, giving a little shrug of his shoulders, which set his cradle rocking, fell asleep in the very face of his visitors. Not so Alba. This was all news to him, grand news. He was young and inexperienced, and, moreover, full of roving fancies. So he lifted his head as far as he dared, nodded delightedly as Rubra described the departure, and, when his cousin ceased speaking, asked eagerly, "And what will he do there?" "Do," said Rubra. "Do. Why, he will do just what everybody else does who goes on the grand tour. What a foolish fellow you are to ask such a question." Now this was no answer at all, as you see plainly, and yet little Alba was quite abashed by it, and dared not push the question further for fear of displaying his ignorance. never thinking that we children are not born with our heads full of information on all subjects, and that the only way to fill them is to push our questions until we are utterly satisfied with the answers, and that no one has reason to feel ashamed of ignorance, which is not now his own fault, but will soon become so if he hushes his questions for fear of showing it. Here Alba made his first mistake. There is only one way to correct a mistake of this kind, and it is so excellent a way that it even brings you out at the end wiser than the other course could have done. Alba, I am happy to say, resolved at once on this course. If, said he, Rubra does not choose to tell me about the grand tour, I will go and see for myself. It was a brave resolve for a little fellow like him. He lost no time preparing to carry it out, but, on pushing against the gate that led to the underground road, he found that the frost had fastened it securely, and he must wait for a warmer day. In the meantime, afraid to ask any more questions, he yet kept his ears open to gather any scraps of information that might be useful for his journey. Listening ears can always hear, and Alba very soon began to learn, from the old trees overhead, from the dry rustling leaves around him, and from the little chipping birds that chatted together in the sunshine. Some said the only advantage of a grand tour was to make one a perfect and accomplished gentleman. Others, that all the useful arts were taught abroad, and no one who wished to improve the world in which he lived would stay at home another year. Old Grandfather Rubra, standing tall and grand, and stretching his knotty arms, as if to give force to his words, said, Of all arts, the art of building is the noblest, and that can only be learned by those who take the grand tour. Therefore all my boys have been sent long ago, and already many of my grandsons have followed them. Then there was a whisper among the leaves. All very well, old Rubra, but did any of your sons or grandsons ever come back from the grand tour? There was no answer. Indeed, the leaves hadn't spoken loudly enough for the old gentleman to hear, for he was known to have a fiery temper, and it was scarcely safe to offend him. But the little brown chipping birds said, one to another, No, 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 they never came back, they never came back. All this sent a chill through Alba's heart, but he still held to his purpose, and in the night a warm and friendly rain melted the frozen gateway, and he boldly rolled out of his cradle forever, and, slipping through the portal, was lost to sight. His mother looked for her baby. His brothers and cousins rolled over and about in search for him. Rubra began to feel sorry for the last scornful words he had said, and would have petted his little cousin with all his heart if he could only have had him once again. But Alba was never again seen by his old friends and companions. The Underworld. How dark it is here, and how difficult for one to make his way through the thick atmosphere. So thought little Alba as he pushed and pushed slowly into the soft mud. Presently a busy hum sounded all about him, and, becoming accustomed to the darkness, he could see little forms moving swiftly and industriously to and fro. You children who live above and play about on the hillsides and in the woods have no idea what is going on all the while under your feet, how the dwarfs and the fairies are working there, weaving moss carpets and grass blades, forming and painting flowers and scarlet mushrooms, tending and nursing all manner of delicate things which have yet to grow strong enough to push up and see the outside life, and learn to bear its cold winds and rejoice in its sunshine. While Alba was seeing all this, he was still struggling on, but very slowly. For first he ran against the strong root of an old tree, then knocked his head upon a sharp stone, and finally, bruised and sore, tired, and quite in despair, he sighed a great sigh, and declared he could go no farther. At that, two odd little beings sprang to his side, the one brown as the earth itself, with eyes like diamonds for brightness, and deft little fingers, cunning in all works of skill. Pulling off his wisp of a cap, and making a grotesque little bow, he asked, Will you take a guide for the Underworld tour? That I will, said Alba, for I no longer find myself able to move a step. Ha ha, laughed the dwarf, of course you can't move in that great body, the ways are too narrow. You must come out of yourself before you can get on in this journey. Put out your foot now, and I will show you where to step. Out of myself? Cried Alba. Why, that is to die. My foot, did you say? I haven't any feet. I was born in a cradle and always lived in it until now, and could never do anything but rock and roll. Ha ha ha, again laughed the dwarf. Hear him talk. This is the way with all of them. No feet, does he say? Why, he has 1,000 if he only knew it. Hands, too, more than he can count. Ask him, sister, and see what he will say to you. With that a soft little voice said cheerfully, Give me your hand, that I may lead you on the upward part of your journey. For, poor little fellow, it is indeed true that you do not know how to live out of your cradle, and we must show you the way." Encouraged by this kindly speech, Alba turned a little toward the speaker, and was about to say, as his mother had long ago taught him that he should in all difficulties, "I'll try," when a little cracking noise startled the whole company, and, hardly knowing what he did, Alba thrust out, through a slit in his shiny brown skin, a little foot reaching downward to follow the dwarf's lead, and a little hand extending upward, quickly clasped by that of the fairy, who stood smiling and lovely in her fair green garments, with a tender, tiny grass blade binding back her golden hair. Oh, what a thrill went through Alba as he felt his new possession! A hand and a foot! 1,000 such, had they not said. What it all meant he could only wonder, but the one real possession was at least certain, and in that he began to feel that all things were possible. And now shall we see where the dwarf led him, and where the fairy, and what was actually done in the underground tour? The dwarf had need of his bright eyes and his skilful hands, for the soft, tiny foot entrusted to him was a mere baby that had to find its way through a strange, dark world, and, what was more, it must not only be guided, but also fed and tended carefully. So the bright eyes go before, and the brown fingers dig out a roadway, and the foot that has learned to trust its guide utterly follows on. There is no longer any danger. He runs against no rocks. He loses his way among no tangled roots, and the hard earth seems to open gently before him, leading him to the fields where his own best food lies, and to hidden springs of sweet fresh water. Do you wonder when I say the foot must be fed? Aren't your feet fed? To be sure, your feet have no mouths of their own. But doesn't the mouth in your face eat for your whole body, hands and feet, ears and eyes, and all the rest? Else how do they grow? The only difference here between you and Alba is that his foot has mouths of its own, and as it wanders on through the earth and finds anything good for food, eats both for itself and for the rest of the body. For I must tell you that, as the little foot progresses, it does not take the body with it, but only grows longer and longer and longer, until, while one end remains at home fastened to the body, the other end has traveled a distance such as will be counted in miles by the atoms of people who live in the underworld. And moreover, the foot no longer goes on alone. Others have come by tens, even by hundreds, to join it. And Alba begins to understand what the dwarf meant by thousands. Thus the feet travel on, running some to this side, some to that, here digging through a bed of clay, and there burying themselves in a soft sand-hill, taking a mouthful of carbon here, and of nitrogen there. But what are these two strange articles of food? Nothing at all like bread and butter, you think. Different indeed they seem. But you will one day learn that bread and butter are made in part of these very same things, and they are just as useful to Alba as your breakfast, dinner, and supper are to you. For just as bread and butter, and other food, build your body, so carbon and nitrogen are going to build his, and you will presently see what a fine, large, strong body they can make. Then, perhaps, you will be better able to understand what they are. Shall we leave the feet to travel their own way for a while, and see where the fairy has led the little hand? Quercus Alba's new sight of the upper world. It was a soft, helpless little baby hand. Its folded fingers lay listlessly in the fairy's gentle grasp. "Now we will go up," she said. He had thought he was going down, and he had heard the chipping bird say he would never come back again. But he had no will to resist the gentle motion, which seemed, after all, to be exactly what he wanted. So he presently found himself lifted out of the dark earth, feeling the sunshine again, and stirred by the breeze that rustled the dry leaves that lay all about him. Here again were all his old companions, the chipping birds, his cousins, old Grandfather Rubra, and best of all, his dear mother. But the odd thing about it all was that nobody seemed to know him. Even his mother, though she stretched her arms toward him, turned her head away, looking here and there for her lost baby, and never seeing how he stood gazing up into her face. Now he began to understand what the chipping birds said. They never came back. They never came back. For they truly came in so new a form that none of their old friends recognized them. Everything that is hands wants to work. That is, hands are such excellent tools that no one who is the happy possessor of a pair is quite happy until he uses them. So Alba began to have a longing desire to build a stem, and lift himself up among his neighbors. But what should he build with? Here the little feet answered promptly. "You want to build, do you? Well, here is carbon, the very best material. There is nothing like it for walls. It makes the most beautiful, firm wood. Wait a minute, and we will send up some that we have been storing for your use." And the busy hands go to work, and the child grows day by day. His body and limbs are brown now, but his hands have a fine shining green. And, having learned the use of carbon, these busy hands undertake to gather it for themselves out of the air about them, which is a great storehouse, full of many materials that our eyes cannot see. And he has also learned that to grow and to build are indeed the same thing, for his body is taking the form of a strong young tree, his branches are spreading for a roof over the heads of 100 delicate flowers, making a home for many a bushy-tailed squirrel and pleasant-voiced wood-bird. For you see, whoever builds cannot build for himself alone. All his neighbors have the benefit of his work, and all enjoy it together. What at the first was so hard to attempt became grand and beautiful in the doing, and little Alba, instead of serving merely for a squirrel's breakfast, as he might have done had he not bravely ventured on his journey, stands before us a noble tree, which is to live 100 years or more. Do you want to know what kind of a tree? Well, Lily, who studies Latin, will tell you that Quercus means oak. And now can you tell me what Alba's rustic cradle was, and two were his cousins Rubra and Coccinia? End of section 9. Section 10 of the stories Mother Nature told her children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Carroll. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 10. Treasure Boxes. We all have our treasure boxes. Misers have strong iron-bound chests full of gold. Stately ladies, pearl-inlaid caskets for their jewels. And even you and I, dear child, have our own. Your little box with lock and key that Aunt Lucy gave you, where you have kept for a long time your choicest paper doll, the peacock with spun glass tail, and the robin's egg that we picked up on the path under the great trees that windy day last spring. That is your treasure box. I no less have mine, and, if you will look with me, I will show you how the trees and flowers have theirs, and what is packed away in them. Come out in the orchard this September day, under the low-boughed peach trees, where great downy-cheeked peaches almost drop into our hands. Sit on the grassy bank with me, and I will show you the peach tree's treasure box. What does the peach tree regard as most precious? If it could speak in words, it would tell you its seed is the one thing for which it cares most, for which it has worked ever since spring, storing food and drinking in sunshine. And it is so dear and valued because, when the peach tree itself dies, this seed, its child, may still live on, growing into a beautiful and fruitful tree. Therefore the mother tree cherishes her seed as her greatest treasure, and has made for it a casket more beautiful than Mrs. Williams' sandalwood jewel box. See the great crack where this peach broke from the bough. We will pull it open. This is opening the cover of the outside casket. See how rich was its outside color, but how wonderfully beautiful the deep crimson fibers which cling about the hard shell inside. For this seed cannot be trusted in a single covering. Moreover, the inner box is locked securely, and I am sorry to say we haven't the key. So, if I would show you the inside, we must break the pretty box with its strong, ribbed walls, and then at last we shall see what the peach tree's treasure box holds. Here, too, are the apples, lying on the grass at our feet. We will cut one, for it, too, holds the apple tree's treasure. First comes the skin, rosy and yellow, a pretty firm wrapping for the outside, but it sometimes breaks when a strong wind tosses the apples to the ground, and sometimes the insects eat holes in it. So, if this were the only covering, the treasure would hardly be very safe. Therefore, next we come to the firm, juicy flesh of the apple, seldom to be broken through by a fall, not often eaten through by insects. But lest even this should fail, we come at last, far in the middle, to horny sheaths, or cells, built up together like a little fortress, surrounding and protecting the brown, shining seeds, which we reach in the very center of all. One thing more let us look at before we leave the apple. Cut it horizontally through the middle with a sharp knife, and try how thin and smooth a slice you can make. Hold it up to the light, and we shall see something very beautiful. There, in the center of the round slice, is the delicate figure of a perfect apple blossom, with all its petals spread. For it was that lovely pink and white blossom from which the apple was formed, a tiny green ball at first, which you may see in the spring if you look where the blossoms have just fallen. As this little green apple grew, It kept in its very heart always the image of the fair blossom, and now that the fruit has reached this ripe perfection, we may still see the same form. The pears, too, the apricots and plums, you may see for yourselves. You do not need me to tell their stories. But come down to the garden, for there I have some of the oddest and prettiest boxes to show. The peas and beans have long canoes, satin-lined and waterproof. On what voyage they are bound, I cannot say. The tall milkweed that grew so fast all summer, and threatened to overrun the garden, now pays well for its lodging by the exquisite treasure which its rough-covered, pale-green bag holds. Press your thumb on its closed edges, for this casket opens with a spring, and, if it is ripe and ready, it will unclose with a touch, and show you a little fish, with silver scales laid over a covering of long silken threads, finer and more delicate than any of the sewing silk in your mother's workbox. This silk is really a wing-like float for each scale, and the scales are seeds, which will not stay upon the little fish, but long to float away with their silken trails, and, alighting here and there, cling and seek for a good place to plant themselves. See, too, how the poppy has provided herself with a deep, round box of a delicate brown color. The carved lid might have been made by the Chinese, it looks so much like their fine work. Full to the brim this box is. The poppy is rich in the autumn, brown seeds by the hundred, packed away for another year's use. Here are the balsams, touch-me-nots, we used to call them when I was a child, for, poor things, so slightly have they locked up their treasure, that even the baby's little finger will open the rough-feeling oblong casket with a snap and a spring, and send the jewels flying all over the garden bed, where you will scarcely be able to find them again. Roses have beautiful round red globes to hold their precious seeds, and so firm and strong are they that the winter winds and snows even do not break or open them. I have found them dashed with sea spray or on dusty roadsides, everywhere strong and safe, making the dullest day bright with their cheery color. If we go to the wet meadows and stream sides, we shall find how the scarlet cardinal has packed away its minute seeds in a pretty little box with 2 or 3 partings inside, and the cowslip has a cluster of oval bags as full as they can hold. Among the rocks, harebells have their tiny 5-parted chests, and the columbine its standing group of narrow brown sacks, which show, if we open them, hundreds of tiny seeds. But in the woods, the oak has stored her treasures in the acorn, the chestnut in its burr which holds the nut so safely. The walnut and beech trees have also their hard, safe caskets, and the boys who go nutting know very well what is inside. Autumn is the time to open these treasures. It takes all the spring and summer to prepare them, and some even need all of September, too, before they are ready to open the little covers. But go into the garden and orchard, into the meadows and woods, and you have not far to look before finding enough to prove that the plants, no less than the children, have treasures to keep, and often most charming boxes to keep them in. End of section 10.
Section 11 of the stories Mother Nature told her children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 11, A Peep into One of God's Storehouses. Once there was a father who thought he would build for his children a beautiful home, putting into it everything they could need or desire throughout their lives. So he built the beautiful house, and anyone just to look at the outside of it would exclaim, "How lovely!" For its roof was a wide, blue dome like the sky, and the lofty rooms had arched ceilings covered with tracery of leaves and waving boughs. The floors were carpeted with velvet, and the whole was lighted with lamps that shone like stars from above. The sweetest perfumes floated through the air, while thousands of birds answered the music of fountains with their songs. And yet, when you have seen all this, you have not seen the best part of it, for the house has been so wonderfully contrived that it is full of mysterious closets, storehouses, and secret drawers, all locked by magic keys or fastened by concealed springs, and each one is filled with something precious or useful or beautiful to look at. Piles upon piles and heaps upon heaps of wonderful stores. Everything that the children could want or dream of wanting is laid up here, but yet they are not to be told anything about it. They are put into this delightful home and left to find it all out for themselves. At first, you know, they will only play. They will roll on the soft carpet and listen to the fountains and the birds and wander from room to room to see new beauties everywhere. But some day a boy full of curiosity, prying here and there into nooks and corners, will touch one of the hidden springs, a door will fly open, and one storehouse of treasures will be revealed. How he will shout and call upon his brothers and sisters to admire with him. How they will pull out the treasures and try to learn how to use his new and strange materials. What did my father mean this for? Why did he give that so odd a shape, or so strange a covering? And so through many questions and many experiments, they learn at last how to use the contents of this one storehouse. But do you imagine that sensible children, after one such discovery, would rest satisfied? Of course, they would explore and explore, try every panel and press every spring, until one by one all the closets should be opened, and all the treasures brought out. And then how could they show their gratitude to the dear father who had taken such pains to prepare this wonderful house for them? The least they could do would be to try to use everything for the purposes intended, and not to destroy or injure any of the precious gifts prepared so lovingly for their use. Now God, our loving Father, has made for us, for you and for me, and for little Madge and Jenny, and for all the grown people and children too, just such a house. It is this earth on which we live. You can see the blue roof and the arched ceilings of the rooms with their canopy of leaves and drooping boughs, and the velvet-covered floors, and the lights and the birds and fountains. But do you know of any of the secret closets? Have you found the key or the spring of a single one, or been called by your mother or father or brother or sister to take a peep into one of them? If you have not, perhaps you would like to go with me to examine one that was opened a good many years ago, but contains such valuable things that the uses of all of them have not yet been found out, and their beauty is just beginning to be known. The doorway of this storehouse lies in the side of a hill. It is twice as wide as the great barn door where the hay carts are driven in, and two railroad tracks run out of it side by side with a little footpath between them. The entrance is light because it opens so wide, but we can see that the floor slopes downward and the way looks dark and narrow before us. We shall need a guide, and here comes one, a rough-looking man with smutty clothes and an odd little lamp covered with wire gauze fastened to the front of his cap. He is one of the workmen employed to bring the treasures out of this dark storehouse, and he will show us, by the light of his lamp, some of the wonders of this place. Walk down the sloping footpath now, and be careful to keep out of the way of the little cars that are coming and going on each side of you, loaded on one side and empty on the other, and seeming to run up and down by themselves. But you will find that they are really pulled and pushed by an engine that stands outside the doorway and reaches them by long chains. At last we reach the foot of the slope, and as our eyes become accustomed to the faint light, we can see passages leading to the right and left, and square chambers cut out in the solid hill. So this great green hill upon which you might run or play is inside, like what I think some of those large ant hills must be, traversed by galleries and full of rooms and long passages. All about we see men like our guide working by the light of their little lamps. We hear the echoing sound of the tools, and we see great blocks and heaps that they have broken away and loaded into little cars that stand ready here and there to be drawn by mules to the foot of the slope. Now, are you curious to know what this treasure is? Have you seen already that it is only coal? And do you wonder that I think it so precious? Look a little closer while our guide lets the light of his lamp fall upon the black wall at your side. Do you see the delicate tracery of ferns more beautiful than the fairest drawing? See, beneath your feet is the marking of great tree trunks lying aslant across the floor, and the forms of gigantic palm leaves strewed among them. Here is something different. Rounded like a nut shell, you can split off one side, and behold, there is the nut lying snugly as does any chestnut in its spur. Did you notice the great pillars of coal that are left to uphold the roof? Let us look at them, for perhaps we can examine them more closely than we can the roof and the sides of these halls. Here are mosses and little leaves, and sometimes an odd-looking little body that is not unlike some of the sea creatures we found at the beach last summer, and everything is made of coal, nothing but coal. How did it happen, and what does it mean? Ferns and palms, mosses and trees and animals, all perfect, all beautiful, and yet all hidden away under this hill and turned into shining black coal. Now, I can very well remember when I first saw a coal fire, and how odd it looked to see what seemed to be burning stones. For when I was a little girl, we always had logs of wood blazing in an open fireplace, and so did many other people, and coal was just coming into use for fuel. What should we have done if everybody had kept on burning wood to this day? There would have been scarcely a tree left standing, for think of all the locomotives and engines and factories, besides all the fires and houses and church houses and schoolhouses. But God knew that we should have need of other fuels besides wood, and so he made great forests to grow on the earth before he had made any men to live upon it. These forests were of trees, different in some ways from those we have now, great ferns as tall as this house, and mosses as high as little trees, and palm leaves of enormous size. And when they were all prepared, he planned how they should be best stored up for the use of his children, who would not be here to use them for many thousands of years to come. So he let them grow and ripen and fall to the ground, and then the great rocks were piled above them to crowd them compactly together, and they were heated and heavily pressed until, as the ages went by, they changed slowly into these hard, black, shining stones, and became better fuel than any wood, because the substance of wood was concentrated in them. Then the hills were piled up on top of it all, but here and there some edge of a coal bed was tilted up and appeared above the ground. This served for a hint to curious men to make them ask, "What is this, and what is it good for?" And so, at last, following their questions, to find their way to the secret stores and make an open doorway and let the world in. So much for the fuel, but God meant something else besides fuel when he packed this closet for his children. At first, they only understood the simplest and plainest value of the coal. But there were some things that troubled the miners very much. One was a gas that would take fire from their lamps and burn, making it dangerous for men to go into the passages where they were likely to meet it. But by and by the wise men thought about it and said to themselves, "We must find out what useful purpose God made the gas for. We know that He does not make anything for harm only." The thought came to them that it might be prepared from coal and conducted through pipes to our houses to take the place of lamps or candles, which until that time had been the only light. But after making the gas, there was a thick, pitchy substance left from the coal, called coal tar. It was only a trouble to the gas makers, who had no use for it, and even threw it away until someone, more thoughtful than the others, found out that water would not pass through it, and so it began to be used to cover roofs of buildings, and mixed with some other substances made a pavement for streets, and being spread over ironwork, it protected it from rust. Don't you see how many uses we have found for this refused coal tar? And the finest of it all is yet to come, for the chemist got hold of it and distilled it and refined it until they prepared from the black, dirty pitch lovely emerald-colored crystals, which had the property of dyeing silk and cotton and wool in beautiful colors, violet, magenta, purple, or green. What do you think of that from the coal tar? When you have new ribbon for your hat, or a pretty dress, or your grandmama buys a new violet ribbon for her cap, just ask if they are dyed with aniline colors, and if the answer is yes, you may know that they came from the coal tar. Besides the dyes, we shall also have left naphtha, useful in making varnish and various oils that are used in more ways than I can stop to tell you, or you would care now to hear. If your cousin Annie has a jet belt clasp or bracelet, and if you find in Aunt Edith's box of old treasures an old, odd-shaped brooch of jet, then you may remember the coal again. For jet is only one kind of lignite, which is a name for a certain preparation of coal. But here is another surprise of a different kind. You have seen boxes of hard, smooth, white candles with the name paraffin marked on the cover. Should you think black coal could ever undergo such a change as to come out in the form of these white candles? Go to the factory where they are made, and you can see the whole process, and then you will understand one more of God's meanings for coal. And all this time I have not said a word about how, while the great forests lay under pressure for millions of years, the oils that were in the growing plant, just as oils are in many growing plants now, were pressed out and flowed into underground reservoirs, lying hidden there until one day, not many years ago, a man accidentally bored into one. Up came the oil, spouting and running over, gushing out and streaming down to a little river that ran nearby. As it floated on the surface of the water, for oil and water will not mix, you know, the boys for mischief set fire to it, and a stream of fire rolled along down the river, proving to everybody who saw it that a new light as good as gas had come from the coal. Now those of us who have kerosene lamps may thank the oil wells that were prepared for us so many years ago. When your hands or lips are cracked and rough from the cold, does your mother ever put on glycerin to heal them? If she does, you are indebted again to the coal oil, for of that it is partly made. And now let me tell you that almost all the uses for coal have been found out since I was a child, and by the time you are men and women, you may be sure that as many more will be discovered, if not from that storehouse, certainly from some of the many others that our good Father has prepared for us, and hidden among the mountains or in the deserts or perhaps under your very feet today. For thousands of people walked over those hills of coal before one saw the treasures that lay hidden there. I have only told you enough to teach you how to look for yourselves. A peep, you know, is all I promised you. Sometime we may open another door together. End of section 11.
Section 12 of the stories Mother Nature told her children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 12. The Hidden Light. There were plenty of gold-green beetles in the forest. Their violet-colored cousins also held royal state there, and scarlet or yellow with black trimmings was the uniform of many a gay troop that careered in splendor through the vine-hung aisles of the hot, damp woods. But clinging to the gray bark of some tree, or lying concealed among the damp leaves in a swamp, was the gayest and fairest of them all, if the truth be told. A little blackish-brown bug, dingy and hairy, not pleasant to look upon, you will say, surely not related to such winged splendors as play in the sunlight. Yet he is true first cousin to the green and gold, or to the royal violet, has as fair a title to a place in your regard, and will prove it, if you will only wait his time. He is like those plain people whom we pass every day without notice, until some great trial or difficulty calls out a hidden power within them, and they flash into greatness in some noble action, and prove their kinship to God. We need not wait long, for as soon as the sun has set, our dull, blackish bug unfolds his wings and reveals his latent glory. He becomes a star, a spark from the sun's very self. If you can prevail upon him to condescend to attend you, you may read or write by his light alone. But come with me to this Indian's hut, where instead of lamp, candle, or torch, 3 or 4 of these luminous insects make all the dwelling bright. See the Indian hunter preparing for a journey, or a raid upon the forest beasts, by fastening to his hands and feet the little lantern flies that shall make the pathway light before him. When the Indian wants his brilliant little servants, he goes out on some little hillock, waving a lighted torch and calling them by name, "Kukui, Kukui," and quickly they crowd around him in troops. And here I must tell you a little Japanese story. The young lady firefly is courted by her many suitors, who themselves carry no light. She is shy and reserved. She will not accept the attentions, but when so importuned that she sees no other escape, she cries, "Let him who really loves me go bring me a light like my own, as a proof of his affection." Then the daring lovers rush blindly at the nearest fire or candle, and perish in the flame. But to return to the Indian. Not only do his lantern flies illuminate his path, but they go on before him, like an advance guard, to clear the road of its infecting mosquitoes, gnats, and other troublesome insects, which they seize and devour on the wing. No harm would the Indian do to his little torch-bearer, for besides the service he renders, does he not embody a portion of the sun god, the holy fire? And there are times when, with reverent awe, these simple forest children think they see in the kukui the souls of their departed friends. And now if we leave the forest and enter the gay ballroom of some tropical city, we shall find that the kukui is a cosmopolitan, at home alike in palace and in hut, in forest and city. Not only does he, as a wise little 4-year-old friend of mine said, light the toads to bed, but restrained by invisible folds of gauze, he flutters in the hair of the fairest ladies, and rivals those earth stars, the diamonds. But it is hardly fair to show only the bright side, even of a kukui, and in justice I must tell that the sugar planters see with dismay their little torches among the canes. For although mosquitoes and gnats will do for food in forests where sugar is not to be had, Who would taste them when a field of cane is all before you? Where to choose? End of chapter 12. Section 13 of Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen Dick. Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 13. Look at this mass of white jelly floating in a bowl of pond water. It is clear and delicate, formed of little globes the size of peas, held together in one rounded mass. In each globe is a black dot. I have it all in my room, and I watch it every day. Before a week passes, the black dots have lengthened into little fishy bodies, each lying curled in his globe of jelly. For these globes are eggs, and these dots are soon to be little living animals. We will see of what kind. Presently, they begin to jerk backwards and forwards, and perform such simple gymnastics as the small accommodations of the egg will allow. And at last one morning, to my delight, I find 2 or 3 of the little things free from the egg, and swimming like so many tiny fishes in my bowl of water. How fast they come out now! 5 this morning, but 20 tonight, and thrice as many tomorrow. The next day I conclude that the remaining eggs will not hatch, for they still show only dull, dead-looking dots. So reluctantly I throw them away, wash out my bowl, and fill it anew with pond water. But before doing this, I had to catch all my little family and put them safely into a tumbler to remain during their house cleaning. This was hard work, but I accomplished it with the help of a teaspoon, and soon restored them to a fresh, clean home. It would be difficult to tell you all their history, for never did little things grow faster or change more wonderfully than they. One morning I found them all arranged round the sides of the bowl, in regular military ranks, as straight and stiff as a company on dress parade. It was then that I counted them, and discovered that there were just 62. You would think, at first sight, that these 62 brothers and sisters were all exactly alike. But after watching them a while, you see that one begins to distinguish himself as stronger and more advanced than any of the others, the captain, perhaps, of the military company. Soon he sports a pair of little feathery gills on each side of his head, as a young officer might support his mustache. But these gills, unlike the mustache, are for use as well as for ornament, and serve him as breathing tubes. How the little fellows grow! No longer a little slim fish, but quite a portly tadpole, with rounded body and a long tail, but still with no expression in his blunt-nosed face, and only 2 black-looking pits where the eyes are to grow. The others are not slow to follow their captain's example. Day after day some new little fellow shows his gills and begins to swim by paddling with his tail in a very stylish manner. And now a sad thing happens to my family of 62, something which would never have happened had I left the eggs at home in their own pond, for there are plenty of tiny water plants whose leaves and stems serve for many a delicious meal to young tadpoles. I did not feed them, not knowing what to give them, and half imagining that they could live very well upon water only. And so it happened that one morning, when I was taking them out with a spoon as usual to give them fresh water, I counted only 50. Where were the others? At the bottom of the bowl lay a dozen little tails,
and I was forced to believe that the stronger tadpoles had taken their weaker brothers for supper. I didn't like to have my family broken up in this way, and yet I didn't at that time know what to give them, so the painful proceeding was not checked. And day after day my strongest tadpoles grew even stronger, and the tails of the weaker lay at the bottom of the bowl. The captain throve finely, had clear bright eyes, lost his feathery gills, and showed through his thin skin that he had a set of excellent legs folded up inside. At last, one day, he kicked out the 2 hind ones, and after that was never tired of displaying his new swimming powers, the forelegs following in due time, and when all this was done, the tail, which he no longer needed to steer with, dropped off, and my largest tadpole became a little frog. His brothers and sisters, such of them were left, for I grieve to say he had required a great many hearty meals to enable him to reach the frog state, followed his illustrious example as soon as they were able, and then of course my little bowl of water was no suitable home for them. So away they went out into the grass, among shallow pools, and into the swamps. I never knew exactly where, and I am afraid that, should I meet even my progressive little captain again, I should hardly recognize him, so grown and altered would he be. He no longer devours his brothers, but with a tongue as long as his body, seizes slugs and insects and swallows them whole. In the winter he sleeps with his brothers and sisters, with the bottom of some pond or marsh for a bed, where they all pack themselves away, hundreds together, laid so closely that you can't distinguish one from the other. But early in the spring you may hear their loud croaking, and when the March sun has thawed the ice from the ponds, the mother frogs are all very busy with their eggs, which they leave in the shallow water, round jelly-like masses, like the one I told you of at the beginning of this story, made up of hundreds and hundreds of eggs. For the frog mother hopes for a large family of children, and she knows by sad experience that no sooner are they born than the fishes snap them up by the dozen, and even after they have found their legs and begin to feel old and competent to take care of themselves, the snakes and weasels will not hesitate to take 2 or 3 for breakfast, if they come in the way. So you see the mother frog has good reason for laying so many eggs. The toads, too, by the way, are cousins to the frogs, come down in April to lay their eggs also in the water. Long necklaces of a double row of fine transparent eggs, each one showing its black dot, which is to grow into a tadpole and swim about with its cousins the frog tadpoles, while they all look so much alike that I fancy their own mothers do not know them apart. I once picked up a handful of them and took some home. One grew up to be a charming little tree toad, while some of his companions gave good promise, by their big awkward forms, of growing by and by into great bullfrogs. End of section 13. Recorded by Colleen Dick, Dorkage.net, Corvallis, Oregon, 13 June 2008.
Of the stories Mother Nature told her children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Section 14. Goldenrod and Asters. Do you know that flowers, as well as people, live in families? Come into the garden and I will show you how. Here is a red rose. The beautiful bright-colored petals are the walls of the house, built in a circle, you see. Next come the yellow stamens, standing also in a circle. These are the father of the household. Perhaps you would say the fathers. There are so many. They stand round the mother who lives in the very middle, as if they were put there to protect and take care of her, and she is the straight little pistol standing in the midst of all. The children are seeds put away for the present in a green cradle at their mother's feet, where they will sleep and grow as babies should, until by and by they will all have opportunities to come out and build for themselves fine rose-colored houses like that of their parents. It is in this way that most of the flowers live. Some, it is true, quite differently. For the beautiful scarlet maple blossoms that open so early in the spring have the fathers on one tree and the mothers on another, and they can only make flying visits to each other when a high wind chooses to give them a ride. The goldenrod and asters and some of their cousins have yet another way of living, and it is of this I must tell you today. You know the roadside asters, purple and white, that bloom so plenteously all through the early autumn? Each flower is a circle of little rays, spreading on every side. But if you should pull it to pieces to look for a family like that of the rose, you would be sadly confused about it, for the aster's plan of living is very different from the rose's. Each purple or white ray is a little home in itself, and these are all inhabited by maiden ladies, living each one alone in the one delicately colored room of her house. But in the middle of the aster you will find a dozen or more little families all packed away together. Each one has its own small yellow house, each has the father, mother, and one child. They all live here together on the flat circle which is called a disc, and round them are built the houses belonging to the maiden aunts who watch and protect the whole. This is what we might call living in a community. People do so sometimes. Different families who like to be near each other will take a very large house and inhabit it together, so that in one house there will be many fathers, mothers, and children, and very likely maiden aunts and bachelor uncles besides. Do you understand now how the asters live in communities? The goldenrod also lives in communities, but yet not exactly after the aster's plan, in smaller houses generally, and these of course contain fewer families. 4 or 5 of the maiden aunts live in yellow-walled rooms round the outside, and in the middle live fathers, mothers, and children, as they do in the asters. But here is the difference. If the goldenrod has smaller houses, it has more of them together upon one stem. I have never counted them, but you can now that they are in bloom, and tell me how many. And have you ever noticed how gracefully these great companies are arranged? For the goldenrods are like elm trees in their forms. Some grow in one single tall plume, bending over a little at the top, some in a double or triple plume, so that the nodding heads may bend on each side. But the largest are like great Etruscan elms, many branches rising gracefully from the main stem and curving over on every side, like those tall glass vases which I dare say you have all seen. Do not forget when you are looking at these golden plumes that each one, as it tosses in the wind, is rocking its hundreds of little dwellings, with the fathers, mothers, babies, and all. When you go out for goldenrod and asters, you will find also the great purple thistle, one of those cousins who has adopted the same plan of living. It is so prickly that I advise you not to attempt breaking it off, but only with your fingertips push softly down into the purple tassel. And if the thistle is ripe, as I think it will be in these autumn days, you will feel a bed of softest down under the spreading purple top. A little gentle pushing will set the down all astir, and I can show you how the children are about to take leave of the home where they were born and brought up. Each seed child has a downy wing with which it can fly, and also cling, as you will see, if we set them loose, and the wind blows them on to your woolen frock. They are hardy children and are not afraid of anything. They venture out into the world fearlessly and presume to plant themselves and prepare to build wherever they choose, without regard to the rights of the farmer's plowed field or your mother's nicely laid out garden. More of the community flowers are the immortelles, and in spring the dandelions. Examine them and tell me how they build their houses, and what sort of families they have, how the children go away when the house is broken up, and what becomes of the fathers, mothers, and aunts. End of section 14. End of The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children by Jane Andrews. Recording by Sean McGahee, ducttapeguy.net.